to participate in our webinar on ISO 14001-2015, Managing Compliance with the Standard. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of this, we're going to have a brief commercial announcement. There we go. Okay. For Perillon and for Trinity, Perillon has an EHS management platform that helps mid to large size global corporations in a range of industries to manage environmental safety and operational data and activities. This platform saves time, prevents unwanted events, and ultimately reduces corporate risk. Customers use Perillon's integrated products to manage EHS compliance, to manage audits and inspections, such as those that may be required under the ISO 14001 standard, incident investigations, and the full range of environmental health and safety data. The solutions have unique mobile apps, has intuitive browser-based modules, and presents a powerful integration platform that drives information flow through the organization. Perillon is a cloud-based system, is standardized, and is highly configurable to meet the needs of its customers. Trinity Consultants, we've been in business for over 40 years, started with one office in Dallas, Texas, with an air quality specialty. Today, in 2017, we have over 45 US offices, plus offices in Canada, China, UK, and the Middle East. We provide business-oriented technical solutions to address EH&S challenges, and in order to better manage service delivery and for us to continually improve what we do for our clients, Trinity is ISO 9001 certified and has been for going on 15 years. Trinity's services span a wide range. Clearly, we do work in the air quality and multimedia EHS regulatory compliance arena. We have an EHS performance and risk management business line that focuses on environmental health, safety, quality, and energy management systems, among other things. We have a SafeBridge business that focuses on industrial hygiene, toxicology, and analytical chemistry targeted predominantly at the pharmaceutical industry. We also have an EHS Information Technology Solutions business, T3, which works with solution providers like Perillon to provide the domain expertise during implementation and assessment of these systems. Trinity sells software, Breeze, for air quality modeling, including explosion damage and toxic chemical release events. And Trinity has a professional training platform, does so extensively, and this webinar is just one of several examples of how we do this. So at this point, we'll dive into some of the details. I'll be speaking first. We'll talk about how does a company effectively transition to the standard. My name is John Fillo. I'm a principal consultant, and I work in the EHS performance and risk management business line, and also have done some of our international work with our offices in the Middle East. Just a reminder, if you have questions, we're going to take them at the end, but as you come up with questions during the course of the presentation, please do not hesitate to submit them through the question pane, which you should see on your screen. So without any further ado, what I'm going to do here is to give a brief overview of the changes to the standard, but focus predominantly on talking about some of the new themes, both what they are and kind of a hint as to how one might go about assessing these themes. We'll be looking at context of organization, life cycle perspective, risk and opportunity evaluation, management of change, and stakeholder needs and expectations. I'll conclude my remarks with some thoughts about how one might effectively transition to the new management system standard and align with that based upon what you may already have in place. So what types of changes have occurred? There's two types, one structural, one thematic. The standard still has a plan, do, check, act structure, although it is new, and it's something that's being implemented across all new ISO standards, 14001, 9001, It's the structure for the soon to be coming 45,001 standard for occupational health and safety management systems, and will be applied to others. It's referred to as Annex SL, and it is the structure that's being used so that one can achieve true integration of management systems if you have more than one. Thematically, basically there was an ISO study group that did an evaluation of what do we do to improve on ISO 14001. The thematic changes address a number of the improvement recommendations that were made by the study group. These recommendations, in many cases, address sustainability themes, which you'll see as we go through some of the topics we'll be talking about. It also provides some enhanced emphasis on some of the key objectives that were derived from the 14001-2004 standard. So, what does the new standard look like? What I'm doing here is kind of little by little peeling back the onion to show you what it looks like. On this slide, new requirements are noted in red, changed requirements in blue, and carryover from the previous standard is just in plain black. So what does the standard contain? Well, number one, it's based upon a continual improvement cycle and a PDCA structure. The first segment of importance is context of the organization. This is new. And really what it does is forces the organization to evaluate who it is, what it does, as a basis for establishing, as one basis for establishing the scope of the management system. One of the most significant changes is the fact that it requires the company to evaluate the needs and expectations of interested parties, otherwise known as stakeholders. It's not a matter of whether one deals with them, it's a matter of who and how one deals with them. This all folds into determining the scope of the EMS and the structure of the management system itself. Leadership is a lot derived from the previous standard, but there is a new dimension to this. We don't have the vernacular of an environmental management representative anymore. In effect, leadership is looking at the leadership of the company and its involvement, its roles and responsibilities and authorities in the management system, not just one person with the wearing the hat of the management system guru, but rather leadership across the organization to improve the management system and take responsibility for it. Planning has a mix of existing changes and new requirements. But what's most significant here is that looking at aspects, compliance obligations, and planning is now based in a rubric of looking at risks and opportunities, driving how one actually addresses planning for the management system and for the development of environmental objectives. Support, many things from the previous standard. One thing which, again, based upon my earlier comment that is very different is that the area of external communication. It's now not the prerogative to decide whether you want to externally communicate. You're going to communicate. You're going to communicate with your interested parties, and you need to define how that's going to be. There is no question there. The other one sort of is kind of a vernacular concept here, the use of the term documented information. There's no need to distinguish anymore, if you don't want to, the difference between documents and records, and to acknowledge the computer age and IT platforms as one means of managing documented information. This provides the basis for what a company needs to do in terms of that. In fact, it puts the onus on the company to determine what documented information is necessary for them to have an effective and continually improving management system. Operation, similar to that before, but it also now reflects some of the earlier themes with respect to leadership and planning. Performance evaluation, the important thing to understand here with respect to monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation, it's that associated with environmental performance as well as that associated with the improvement of the management system. And again, improvement, nonconformity, corrective action, and of course, the underlying theme of continual improvement. Now, what areas are we going to focus on here? Context of the organization, the new requirement. Two new requirements in the standard relate to considering life cycle perspective and aspects development and operational controls and risks and opportunities, the theme of management of change, and improving stakeholder, aka interested parties, engagement and external communications. Let's start with context. What does this mean? Now, anybody developing a management system is going to keep in the back of their minds what their company is all about, therefore what the scope should be. But what this does is put the onus on the organization to do an explicit evaluation of external and internal context and how it affects that scope. So what are the issues or conditions that are relevant to a particular organization? A logistics and transportation company is going to have very different ones, say from an oil and gas company, electric utility, or a chemical company. You need to consider environmental parameters, what those external issues are and how they affect the business, and what are internal conditions within the company that are going to affect the business as well as the management system. And the big theme here is that the theme associated with needs and expectations of interested parties. One not only needs to identify who these interested parties are, but one needs to characterize those parties' interest in environmental performance. And the fact is that these interested parties or stakeholders may very well have needs of their own that they want to have satisfied in how you implement your management system. You need to determine their needs with respect to environmental performance. And the fact is that some of those needs may very well equate to a compliance obligation for you. The fact is that I think one simple example in the quality standpoint would be, customers have specifications for making their products. Well, that's not an option for you. You've got to comply with that, otherwise the customer's not going to buy your products. You can use similar logic for environmental. Now, how do you do this? And that's one of the things we're going to try to do here. Give you an idea of how do you do it. If you look at the left-hand side of the slide, there's a list of a dozen or more items that are common issues for consideration in an environmental management system. As environmental managers, we understand these things. We have to deal with these things on a day-to-day basis. Air, water, waste, toxicity, renewable and energy efficiency, waste minimization, water. We deal with these things all the time. But what one wants to do is to systematically work through each of these to understand which ones are the most important for your management system. How are they impacted by key drivers in your organization or key drivers external to your organization? Have they represented a potential problem area and therefore you need to raise the bar on how you deal with them going forward? Are there any that can be leveraged for beneficial effect, and not just for the company, but beneficial effect for other interested parties? Makes the management system a lot more effective and satisfies potential needs and expectation of those parties. Does any offer a competitive advantage for you? Clearly, that's something that would put those high on the hit list. And finally, are they material to stakeholders? Do stakeholders believe these are critical to them? By doing a systematic evaluation of this, one can then come down with a short list of what are the things that need to be incorporated in the management system. The next topic is life cycle perspective. All of you are probably familiar with what a life cycle assessment is, or at least have heard about it. It's basically, I'll call it a soup to nuts evaluation of environmental impacts associated with a process or a product. It covers the full life cycle from extraction, processing, design and production, transportation and distribution, both internal and external to the organization, use and maintenance of the product or process, recycling, disposal, and even end-of-life treatment. Now, the standard does not require that a company perform a detailed life cycle assessment. That would be a pretty daunting effort to have to do. However, it does chide the companies to consider the perspective of life cycle in how they address their aspects and impacts. Again, how do we do this? Well, one way, and this is just one of many ways that could be done, is to consider the greenhouse gas protocol list of scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions categories, both upstream and downstream of the operation. So you're not going to do a greenhouse gas inventory, don't worry. Don't want to scare you on that one, but rather look at the categories and how they relate to your business. Purchase goods, capital goods, up and downstream transportation and distribution, waste, business travel, employee commute, processing, use, and end-of-life treatment of sold products, upstream and downstream lease assets. What are these things? How do they affect your business? Should they be included? And the way to do this is you can do a simple evaluation, put together basically a risk evaluation, low, medium, high, 1 to 5, 1 to 10, whatever your choice is. And for each category, look at the level of impact, look at the level of stakeholder interest, and just as importantly, look at your ability to influence that particular category. In fact, you can probably cut the list down pretty substantially just by looking at whether you have the ability to influence. If you don't have the ability to influence, you can't manage it. And it doesn't need to be addressed as an integral part of your management system. But at least you have to look at it to determine which ones are the most significant. Add the numbers up, multiply the numbers up the way you want to. It provides you a basis for relatively ranking these. Remember, what this makes you do, it makes you look at things that go beyond the boundaries of your facility that may be important to your business. Risk and opportunity evaluation is a new theme. Now, it doesn't say that you need to do a formal risk assessment, but using that thinking is very helpful to figure out how to wade through this particular requirement. In effect, what do? You identify risks or opportunities. You assess each of them. You evaluate comparatively between the various items to see which ones are the most significant, determine how they need to be controlled or if they need to be controlled more than they already are, monitor what happens, and then guess what? You get to start all over again. This is not something you do and put on the shelf and 5 years later maybe take a look at. Your business, the business environment, the economic environment, regulations are always changing, so your risk profile and your opportunity profile is going to change as well. Now, how do you do this? Well, one way is to kind of take what I call a numeric linguistic approach to ranking likelihood and impact. Now, if you're fortunate enough to have actual probability information based on facility, company, or industry statistics, that's great, but most of us don't have that. So instead, what you do is set up a hierarchy. It never happens. It happens once every 5 years, once every year, lots of times every year. You can basically rank order that. Again, low, medium, high, 1 to 5, whatever your choice is, to create a spectrum over which you're going to relatively rank your risks. Now, what about impact? That's a little more complicated, because it can have several dimensions. It can have a financial dimension, cost to the company, severity and magnitude of compliance-related fines and penalties, the potential for an environmental or operational impact, the potential for an occupational community incident, say in the case of a hazardous chemical or toxic chemical release, or the potential for adverse impact to reputation. Let's look at that one briefly. You have the local critic that no matter what you do, you bend over backwards, do everything that critic wants, and that critic is still in your face wanting more. But then again, what happens if it's a broader local impact or national impact or something which has international import for a multinational company or might cause permanent reputation damage? Again, for each of these, you can create a spectrum of rankings and then basically determine those relative rankings, plot them on something like a heat map, which is what the slide is showing here, and then from there decide what you're going to do. If a risk is in the upper right-hand quadrant, high impact, high likelihood, you need to reduce it. There's no question in the matter. High impact, low likelihood, well, odds are it's not going to happen, but if it does, it's still going to be a significant impact, so you better plan accordingly. Low impact, high likelihood, well, that's lots of things happen, many instances occurring. You need to monitor that just to make sure the aggregate impact is not significant. And then things in the lower quadrant, lower left-hand quadrant, well, quite frankly, you don't worry about. You're looking to address those things that are most, relatively speaking, most important. You don't obsess over the absolute. You make sure you have things ranked properly. Now, what about management of change? Why is it so important? Well, personally speaking, quite frankly, I personally think management of change should be a part of any business process and is essential to an effective EMS. It basically allows a facility or an organization to operate at an acceptable level of risk. This then allows one to control that risk and improve aspects of operation. MOC is central to risk management. It derives from occupational health and safety, but is applicable well beyond that. Lack of change management oftentimes can be a root cause of many environmental and occupational health and safety and operational incidents. People were not paying attention to the details in trying to affect a change. So for change management, what it does is allow you to manage risk and keep it at a desired level, but even more importantly, it better ensures that you are able to successfully implement the objective of those changes. If one doesn't manage the change process, you run the risk of not being able to achieve that change. Now, how do you want to implement it? Well, you need to have a level of review and approval that needs to be risk-based and applies to basically all changes. It can be a change in process, in personnel, in equipment, in procedures, in material use, in suppliers, in vendors, in work processes. Anytime something's going to change, the people who have to change need to understand what that change is. And management of change allows you to better manage that. Changes with, again, looking at relative risk, changes with high environmental risks should be reviewed in greater detail because those are things that have a potential for having a more significant impact. You'll do it for that more than you will for those with lower risks. And you can use a prioritization scheme to basically address that as well. And quite honestly, if you're fortunate enough that your company has an overarching management of change process, leverage it, use it, because and apply it to the environmental management system, because quite honestly, everybody else in the company is using it for their own, in their own purview or own areas of interest. Finally, stakeholder groups of potential interest, the interested parties. Today, in today's world, with the focus on sustainability and corporate responsibility, stakeholders have an unprecedented ability to change the way in which companies do their business. It has never been the way it is now. And you have lots of stakeholders, employees, customers, vendors, suppliers, the media, regulators, investors, and there's lots of investors out there. There's a load of these organizations that may, not will, but may have an effect on you, your organization, your facility, and how it does business. Now, how do you analyze it? Well, here's a list of about a half dozen questions. You can ask another dozen, but take a look at some of these. What's the impact of the stakeholder on the business? What's the business impact on the stakeholder? Let's flip that mirror around a little bit. What's important to the stakeholder? What's their hot buttons? And not only just what they are, but why are they that way? What is informing their opinion on a particular issue? What type of interaction does a stakeholder desire and why? Are they friendly? Are they confrontational? Are they constantly in your face? Are they sit back and just wait for something to happen to provide input to you? Have you had interaction with these stakeholders in the past? And if so, how has it occurred? How well did it occur? Are there changes you need to make? What are opportunities and risks in a relationship? What are the benefits and cost of a relationship? All these things you can consider, but how do you kind of meld this down to something which is going to allow you to assess who your important stakeholders are and how to deal with them? Well, there's another method. There's a process. You want to establish a process, and it's actually quite straightforward. One, you identify your stakeholders. Depending upon how big an organization you are, you may do it by group, or maybe it's just individual stakeholders. That really is going to be up to you based upon the scope of your operation that's being put under the management system microscope. You then want to characterize your stakeholders. You want to understand how they might influence you. Are they investors, in which case they give you money so you can operate your organization? Are they suppliers, and thus can influence what you do? Do you have a dependency on them? Is there something they do that you need to be able to run your business? And also, what's their readiness for engagement? Are they're there and they listen and they're very, very cooperative? they're confrontational, they're competitive. There's lots of different dimensions you can look at here, but in effect, by rating these from influence, dependency, and engagement readiness, you can better prioritize who you should be paying most attention to. You prioritize the list, and then based upon what you found out, you assign a classification. Do you just have to keep them satisfied and they're happy? Are they happy if they're just informed? In which case, they just want to know what's going on. They want good transfer of information. Are they basically pretty innocuous when it comes to how they might affect your organization? So you just monitor them to make sure nothing's changing. Or do you really need to manage them closely because they are competitive, they are confrontational, and they need a lot of attention to deal with them in the course of you doing business? Again, this is perfect for a ranking scheme. And the next slide illustrates that again. Who is the stakeholder or the stakeholder group if you have a very complex organization, or say you have a management system that's a corporate management system and you have several dozen facilities that are covered under that management system certification. You look at influence, you look at dependency, you look at engagement readiness. In this case, we're using a 1 to 5 scale. You can use low, medium, high, 1 to 10 if you have the granularity of information to inform it. Relatively rank your stakeholders and take the ones that are the highest priority to apply how you're going to actually then deal with those stakeholders on a go-forward basis and how they'll be reflected in your environmental management system. So with that in mind, what are some hints about how to deal with EMS transition and how to better align the transmission with the new the management system with the new standard? Number one, you need to conduct the gap analysis. It may seem trite, but basically what you want to do is look at what you have relative to the standard, see where you've met the standard, see where you're almost there but not quite, see where you're not even close, so you can plan for how to upgrade or transition your current EMS to the new standard. Aspects and impacts and operations are fundamentally affected by the concept of life cycle perspective and risk and opportunity evaluation. The former's characterized in the context of the latter of risk and opportunity, and you need to look at these things. Life cycle perspective, remember again, you're extending the influence of the management system beyond just your plant or facility, and that is critical. And risk and opportunity is just as important as risk, because if you can identify opportunities by managing an environmental aspect, then you're better off for doing so. There will be increased engagement with stakeholders. You do not have the choice of deciding whether. The choice has been made in the standard. You need, therefore, to engage with your stakeholders and, more importantly, determine where you're going to put your most energy and who you're going to engage with the most to basically address their needs and expectations. Remember, they can affect your compliance obligations. Having a management of change process, I can't underscore enough, is critical. The standard refers to change management in a couple of different portions of the standard. So this is not a matter of an option for this is a best practice, but it's now not just a best practice. It needs to be addressed to some degree in your management system. Manages risk and also ensures you achieve the objectives of those changes the way you would want to. And finally, what is this all about at the end? What's the end game here? The end game is that you want to improve environmental protection and you want to improve performance. That's what this all is about. And one of the underpinnings of the standard is better integrating EMS within the organization, its strategy and its operations and its performance. With that being said, again, I'd like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. And I'm going to now make an attempt to pass the baton to Michael Tucker with National Grid, so he can tell us a bit about how National Grid has affected its transition to the new standard. Okay, Michael, you have the, yes, you do.
Thank you, John. So thank you very much, and welcome to all the attendees, and thank you for your interest. My discussion today is going to take a bit of a different focus we're going to look at how National Grid, EMS, and ISO 14001 conformance can be enhanced through the use of EHS software. So just a reminder that we will be collecting questions throughout our presentations, and we will address answers to those questions at the end. So my discussion will take a little bit of a different approach from John's, in that I will not be focusing solely on looking at the transition from the former ISO 14001 standard to the new, but rather looking at your overall environmental management system and application of software. I like to begin most of my presentations with a takeaway thought. If you walk away with nothing else, I would enjoy that you recall that fulfillment of any compliance obligation does not simply happen. You may have the best process, and yet it must be properly managed. Your staff knowledge, your staff experience will change. Expectations and priorities will change. Recall what John spoke about when he talked about stakeholders, interested parties. Identification of your compliance obligations is fundamental, and it must be followed very closely by timely monitors and measures of success. So I am still Michael Tucker. I come to the industry from the United States Navy. I had submarine duty as a commissioned officer. And for the past 30 years, I have been engaged in environmental management for the utility industry. The last 5 years, I have been the Principal Program Manager of our environmental management system and our sustainability and greenhouse gas reporting programs. National Grid itself is an energy company. Energy is our business. We are engaged in electricity generation, its transmission, and its distribution to the local customer. Likewise with natural gas, we conduct transmission of the gas and distribution to the local customer. We operate liquefied natural gas storage facilities, and all of this is conducted across a 5-state footprint. One of our challenges is what we refer to as the energy trilemma, which is the need to balance 3 seemingly divergent thoughts: the cost of energy, the security of its supply, and sustainability. Our regulators, and in fact changes that they make to the regulations that we must comply with, are often a response in order to try to balance how the regulators see these conflicting objectives. So where do these compliance expectations come from? Obviously from the regulator. They also come to us from our customers, those stakeholders, those interested parties. Because in the ISO 14001 world, you have compliance obligations which come from statutes. But if you make a commitment to an interested party, that is a compliance obligation, and you are required to fulfill it. And so I say that regulatory compliance is not optional. The quality of your service, your corporate reputation, your financial well-being will all derive from proper management of your compliance obligations. And so what is the role of an EHS software system in helping you to manage these considerations, helping you manage your overall environmental management system? Within the Plan, Do, Check, Act model, we're going to take a look at how software can be applied to each of those phases, whether it be risk management, providing both leading and lagging indicators, and we prefer the leading indicator, especially when we talk compliance obligations. I would like to know that things are starting to go wrong before I have a regulator tell me they already have gone wrong. And also, we need feedback. We need to report, and this is especially true with keeping top management, the leadership of the company, informed about your environmental performance. They are the ones that are going to provide the necessary resources in order to allow you to improve your performance. And so we're going to look at how everyone can benefit from a reminder and how managers will benefit from having the big picture. Thinking of the Plan, Do, Check, Act model, we'll start first with a discussion of planning. Recall John speaking of the context of the organization. I've sort of simplified it here, and I've asked a series of 5 questions. Who are we? What do we do? Who cares about us and what we do? Now, how should we respond? And most importantly, how will we respond? And everything within your management system is going to come back to these considerations. The answers that you come to in answering those questions should allow senior management to state unequivocally what their policy is. How will you engage? How will you manage your activities in order to protect and minimize your impact on the environment? And so if we look at a few early planning activities, we know that we have certain compliance obligations. Whatever they may be, you may have a report that must be submitted, an activity that must be conducted, a permit to be obtained, a license to be renewed. A good software system will track that and tell you it is due. This person must do it, and if it starts to get late, it's going to get escalated to a manager. In your planning, you are answering those 5 questions, and you are identifying what do you do, what can go wrong, and how bad can it get. And you need to document that, and you need to have a way to hold on to that documentation if you will comply, or I should say conform, to ISO 14001. More importantly, you will establish your objectives. How are you going to get better? And what are your plans to accomplish those objectives? And again, that all needs to be documented, and it's all part of your planning process. Once you have your plans done, it's time to go to work. That's the doing part. So I sort of have broken this down when I look at doing. Let's do it the right way. Define what resources are required. Go to your leadership, your executives. Ensure that they are committed to the program. Make sure that all who are working in the environmental areas who may impact the environment are aware of, that they understand their responsibilities. If an individual must perform a task, ensure that individual is competent to perform that task. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Everybody needs to constantly be reminded of what your goals and objectives actually are. And that goes both for your internal employees or staff and for those all-important interested parties. Documentation and processes, they have to be current, they have to be available, and they have to be used. So that's what we call doing it the right way. All an aspect of the ISO requirements. If we keep it going, we need to establish control, limits, and actions. How do we ensure that our activities, products, and services will not impact the environment? What do we monitor to make sure they are in control? What is our limit that tells us things are starting to go wrong? And what are we going to do if we reach that limit? And finally, what happens if something actually does go wrong? Now you've already planned your emergency response, now implement it. Use your response plans, train to them, and if you use them, find the lessons learned, make them better. So looking at doing from a software standpoint, the greatest opportunity you have is in performance tracking. Looking in almost all common software will provide a multitude of dashboards or graphical displays which tell you at a glance how well you're doing. This is monitoring and measurement of your progress, which allows you to analyze and trend your performance. You will also be collecting all of your operating data. For National Grid, that involves collection of information, our air, water and waste data, air emissions, water discharges, waste disposal records and volumes and types. From the air information, we calculate our total greenhouse gas emissions, and we are able to maintain records of all water discharge testing. And again, we are able to monitor and measure all of that information in order to tell us yes or no. We are on track. We are meeting our objectives. Are we close to having a compliance issue or not? The third phase of the Plan, Do, Check, Act model is in checking, and it is significant. It basically tells you, are we achieving our plans? Is our management system working? Indeed, is it even being followed? So checking involves a variety of activities. It's a crossover. You will evaluate compliance. You must evaluate compliance. How well are you doing at fulfilling all of your compliance obligations? Monitor, measure, analyze, and trend your performance. Scheduled assessments. Your evaluations of compliance are required to be scheduled in advance, not just whenever you feel like it. Your management system must specify how and when you will evaluate compliance. You must conduct internal audits. Again, looking at your overall management system internally. You have to ask the question of yourself, are we achieving our plans? The EHS software, again, provides that same opportunity to help you in the check process, the evaluation of compliance. You can visualize your performance. You can look at it in real time. You can export your information to reports, very critical to senior managers to help and it allows you to help them understand exactly how you are performing and if you need to make changes in your plans. Do you need more resources? You better have the data to back that up in most cases, I would say. National Grid has implemented a very aggressive assessment program with over 160 independent facilities. We must have a structured way in order to assess and evaluate each one of those facilities for the various types of operations that take place. We utilize mobile technology to provide an increase in efficiency. The assessments will trigger alerts, which allow direct creation of corrective actions. These assessments can be scheduled or they can be conducted ad hoc as needed. With proper arrangement, we are able to look at a single facility, and if we find multiple issues, that gives us one type of indication of what corrective action might be needed. If I look at the same attribute across multiple facilities and I find multiple deficiencies, that tells me something else about my system. And that is all integrated to dashboards, which can provide me that information with basically one mouse click. And so with that, armed with the information we obtain from those assessments, from our checking, we're now prepared to act. So we have corrective actions and preventive actions, which create more tasks. Let's get it back on track. Acting also involves keeping top management aware of how the management system is functioning, looking at your results versus your intended actions, and making recommendations, all leading towards the desired end, which is continual improvement. So the software will then simply create new tasks for corrective action. It will have tasks, whether they come from audit, assessment, any type of finding. And your documentation system tracks necessary changes to your plans, procedures, and it makes them available at the point of use to all your staff. So if I put it all together, the idea of Plan, Do, Check, Act is to make your management system live. It is one overall process. So let's take a look at, very briefly and in conclusion, what has National Grid achieved as a result of implementing this approach and our software system. We have successfully been registered to conform to the ISO 14001 2015 standard. That actually occurred last summer, July 2016. The system is in full support of our goal of zero compliance incidents. And the graphic simply shows our trend. We commit to fulfilling all compliance obligations. We track when we do not meet that commitment. And if I may just say, the red squares at the bottom are this year. I'll knock on some wood here. The advantages that I believe we have achieved: improved efficiency through the use of mobile technology. We are able to communicate directly with the EHS software while we are in the field, and that improves both time of response and it reduces the resource requirements for conducting our assessments on the part of staff. All of the tasks that are held within the system are easily adjusted when regulations or legal requirements change. Our former system, before we made a change, was quite inflexible and therefore made this particular aspect extremely difficult. We have improved tracking on our environmental objectives and status of progress to achieve, which is critical in the quest for continual improvement. And finally, in terms of system maintenance, we have a robust state-of-the-art EHS system. I want to thank you for your time, and I'm going to turn this back over to Caitlin, who will take your questions.
Hi, thank you. Mike, if you could just keep your screen being shared, I will run through some questions that we received. And Mike, I'm going to have you go first since you're already unmuted. You may have covered this question a little bit, but I'm going to see if I can get any more details out of you. So the first question is, how are you using Perillon to record your aspects and impacts register, legal and other register, your stakeholder register, and your internal audit results?
Great question. The aspect impact register actually is held within our EMS document itself, but that is retained within the document filing system, and so it is available to all. Similarly, with all lists that are required by the ISO 14001 2015 standard, if it says documented information shall be retained, those records are held within the software system as an electronic file, and they are filed as such so that we can essentially filter down to documented information under all of the various categories, whether it be aspects, impacts, significant aspects, objectives, plans to achieve. There was one other, audits. We essentially hold audit results within the system. An audit is really just a special form of assessment, and we have created an assessment that is a complete internal EMS audit, which can be both scheduled or conducted ad hoc, and therefore we have all of the results of the audit, including the audit report, directly within the software system. Hopefully that answers the question, Caitlin.
Okay, great, thank you. I've got a question here for John. And John, let us know if you are going to need to refer back to your slides to answer. The question is, our company already has a risk assessment process to identify our significant aspects, and we don't really believe that other life cycle considerations are relevant to our business. Is there anything we need to do?
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. That's actually an interesting question. It's rare that I've ever seen a company not have some kind of a risk assessment process for ranking aspects. That's how you have to do it. But the standard goes a little bit beyond just that. The organization, based upon the standard, needs to have documented information of its significant environmental aspects and the criteria that have been used to determine them. If you indeed have determined that life cycle considerations have no impact on your environmental aspects, you probably need to make sure you have documented information, otherwise known as a record, that demonstrates what you did to come to the conclusion. Simply, explaining to the registrar with your heart of hearts that, we don't think it's important, probably isn't going to satisfy their professional curiosity. So you need to actually have documented information that shows, here's the evaluation we went through to make that determination. If you don't have that, and you basically came to the conclusion by having a few people sit in the room for an hour and just kind of chat back and forth about it, you need to have some evidence for the registrar to be able to convince them that you actually went through some kind of an analysis and have a record of it.
Okay, great.
Hopefully that will address the question.
Yes. All right, I think we have time for one more. I'm going to pass it back to Mike. What benefit has National Grid achieved through ISO 14001 certification?
Well, apart from the benefit that National Grid has achieved through certification to the standard, I would say that apart from the intended benefit of having a fully structured environmental management system, certification to the standard has provided a solid demonstration of National Grid's commitment to the environment, to the investment community. Being an international company, National Grid has need to embrace the goals of investors in the European community as well as in the United States. So I think that would be the principal benefit achieved.
Okay, great, thank you. And it's 3 o'clock Eastern here on the nose. I think we're gonna close it off for today, but I do thank everyone for attending. One of the most common questions I was receiving was about receiving the slides and the recording. Yes, this webinar was recorded. Yes, we will be sending out the recording and the slides as well as a survey on our webinar today. Thank you everyone for participating.